one of the things I would agree with Bill O'Reilly on is that you don't point to bad behavior to justify other bad behavior. I would agree with that. I would say similarly, you don't engage in an immoral act in order to make some sort of a logical case about morality. You kind of lose all your credibility when you do that. I'm referring, of course, to G-Man in his lame attempt at quashing the no true Scotsman fallacy, even if we could set aside for a moment that there's no comparison between a G-Man's completely dishonest 24-hour conversion story and Hitler's somewhat more consistent writings about being, doing things in God's name and doing God's work and that sort of thing. However, I think all of that is really immaterial, actually. I understand that when it comes to the no true Scotsman fallacy that G-Man thought he was refuting, really this, I think, largely came about by theists saying that, what Hitler did was the end game of atheism. That atheism run to its logical conclusion ends in something like what Hitler did. And atheists rightfully said, well, actually, he invoked God quite a bit, so he wasn't exactly an atheist. And then, of course, the Christians would say, well, he wasn't a real Christian. And then the atheists would say, naturally, that's the no true Scotsman fallacy. You can just say that about anyone. But I think we're all missing the point by throwing these guys back and forth, these hot potatoes of these horrible dictators, these horrible murderous genocidal maniacs, as some sort of bonus points for either side. It's sort of the any old argument will do that Ozzy rails against so much, and rightfully so, I would say. Because you can't really point to these guys and their ideologies and boil it down to atheism or theism. Certainly there's nothing in atheism that would inform someone like Hitler to do the things that he did. This is a rejection of one claim. You would have to at least interview him or do some serious research on the rest of his beliefs about reality and humankind. And I think you would necessarily need to understand his childhood and what may have led to the rationalizations that he used for doing the things that he did later in life. You can't really disconnect the two, I don't think. You need to understand how he went from peaceful, cooing little baby to genocidal tyrant maniac. And not just try to boil it down to, well, he was an atheist. And similarly, I don't think there's anything about being a Christian that would inform him to do the things that he did. There might be. He may have invoked certain scripture, but that doesn't really cut the mustard because, of course, if that was all it takes, then all Christians would be like that. You would need to determine, well, what was the difference between his interpretation of scripture and sort of like every other Christian who didn't kill millions of people, and their interpretation of scripture? That's kind of important, right? There's some ingredients missing here that if we want to understand history and people and we want to move ourselves up the ladder in terms of morality and evolution, in terms of our society and how we treat one another, those things are very, very, very important to understand. And just tossing these guys around like hot potatoes doesn't cut the mustard. I think it's irresponsible. Equally irresponsible is just trotting out the same old tired arguments. Atheism can only lead to nihilism, without understanding the positive beliefs of any particular atheist. I noticed recently the Bible Thumping Wingnut recapped a study that was done, which basically said that Americans intuitively think that atheists are immoral, including actually even some atheist respondents. Now, first of all, I would say we need to be very careful with words like intuitive, because nowhere in there do they discuss the potentiality for cultural bias and cultural influence on that intuition. So I think we need to be very careful about that. But of course, the Bible Thumping Wingnut has made many videos recently about immorality and atheism. Recently had a video on atheism and suicide, and he talked about, if you're going to be a consistent atheist, you could only be reduced to a pure nihilism. But more importantly, the Bible Thumping Wingnut, although he didn't make too much of a commentary on the study, taken in context and looking at all of his other videos leading up to it, it seems to me that he's trying to use that as a feather in the cap for his for his viewpoint that atheism is immoral, that atheism led to its logical conclusion, leads to immorality. And this is highly irresponsible, because even the study that he was reporting on doesn't make that claim. The study is basically about public opinion. This is an argument from public opinion, because the study actually says that the majority of Americans see atheists as immoral despite evidence to the contrary. In other words, atheists are typically underrepresented in the prison population and in the criminal justice system, yet most people think that atheists are immoral. And I would actually argue probably that the fact that atheist respondents echoed this is sort of more evidence of the fact that there's a cultural bias at play there. But either way, I think it's highly irresponsible to sort of put that report forward as though it somehow makes the case for your side. You either are interested in truth or not. You're either interested in truth or you're interested in just scoring points for your side. You know, if you're on the right side of truth, you don't need to make shit up, and you don't need to bend things to suit. Now, maybe there's so much of a cognitive bias going on there that Tim didn't see that, didn't even hear it when he read it, despite the evidence to the contrary. But I do think it's irresponsible to put those things forth, just as it is irresponsible to be throwing Hitler and Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot around as the evidence for the immorality for whatever group you want to pin that to, when it's not represented in the rest of the entire population of that group, if in fact that person does belong to that group. All this focus on no true Scotsman fallacies and all that is really more diversion tactics. What we really need to look at is if we really care about those atrocities and genocides and stuff, we really need to look at what led to that. What were the rationalizations that the person used to commit those atrocities, and what was their experience like as a human being? I'm sorry, but you cannot dissect those kind of actions from someone as an adult, from their childhood, from their experience in those formative years. Again, something takes somebody from being a cooing baby to being a murderous, genocidal tyrant maniac. And it's not the rejection of a single claim, and it's probably not the acceptance of a single claim either. One more thing. I think I glossed over a little bit too much the fact that Tim was really misrepresenting the study that he was reading. And I think you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And in this case, I think Tim's being part of the problem. The danger of misrepresenting or mischaracterizing an entire group of people shouldn't really be overlooked. I mean, after all, I started this video talking about the hot potato of Hitler and the no true Scotsman fallacy. It shouldn't go unnoticed that, of course, Hitler and his merry band of thieves couldn't have gotten away with what they had done without the consent and the will of the masses, of the people. Now, of course, it may have taken some massaging through propaganda and whatnot, but ultimately they had to secure the consent of the masses. And so that should really illustrate for us the danger of misrepresenting or mischaracterizing an entire group of people for whatever ends you seek. Demonizing an entire group of people to suit some sort of ends should never be underestimated as to how dangerous it can actually be. I would encourage Tim to become part of the solution and not part of the problem, and actually acknowledge the entire other study that was hyperlinked in the study that he was reading, which gave a much more fair representation of atheists in the criminal justice system and in prisons, and again, to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Thanks everyone for watching.